Yo, what is up, Street Hoops Nation? It's your boy Dre, and today we are doing something a little different because I want to talk about a name that most casual Bengals fans could not have picked out of a lineup back in April. And by the time this video is over, you are going to understand exactly why this man might quietly become one of the more important role players on this entire roster before his rookie season is finished. Cincinnati spent this entire offseason pouring resources into their defense, trading for Dexter Lawrence, adding Jonathan Allen, bringing in Boye Mafe and Brian Cook, and running it back with basically the same core on offense around Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins. But buried inside that draft class is a fourth-round wide receiver out of Georgia named Colby Young, and once you actually watch the tape on this guy, you start to realize this is not just a camp body they took to fill out a roster spot. I'm Dre, this is Dre Talk Sports, and today we are breaking down the film, the measurables, and the exact path this rookie needs to take to actually see the field this season. Let's get into it, because there is a lot more here than a casual glance at a draft recap would ever tell you. First, let's set the scene, because context always matters before you start judging a prospect off a name you have probably never heard before. Colby Young comes out of Georgia standing somewhere in that 6'5" range, which immediately tells you this is not your typical shifty slot receiver running option routes underneath. This is a big-bodied target, and if you know anything about how the Bengals have built their receiver room over the last several years, you already know that size at the position is basically a company philosophy at this point in Cincinnati. Jamar Chase is a load, T. Higgins is a load, and now here comes another oversized target in that exact same mold, drafted in the middle rounds where teams are usually hunting for exactly this kind of high upside. Physical specimen who might need a full year or two to round into a real role rather than stepping in and contributing on day one. Now here's where it gets interesting, because the pre-draft profile on this guy is a little bit of a mixed bag once you actually dig into the testing numbers, and I think that tells its own story before we even get to the tape. This is a man who reportedly put up strong numbers in the weight room, the kind of raw strength testing that jumps off the page and makes evaluators go, okay, this guy is built different physically compared to a normal receiver prospect. But when you get into the more agility-based drills, the picture gets murkier fast. His short area burst numbers were reportedly nothing special, and by several accounts he skipped some of the change of direction testing altogether during the pre-draft process. Now, is that a red flag? Or is that just a smart, savvy prospect showcasing his strengths and hiding his weaknesses in a process that is basically one long audition for 32 different employers? I will let you form your own opinion on that one, but it is worth knowing going in, because it lines up almost perfectly with what shows up on the actual college tape. This is not a stop on a dime, shake you out of your cleats kind of receiver. This is a load up and drive kind of receiver. A long strider who needs a little bit of runway to really get moving. And once you understand that one detail about his game, basically everything else about his tape starts to make a lot more sense. Let's talk for a second about why a team even takes a swing on a prospect with this exact profile in the middle rounds, because I think that decision-making process gets overlooked constantly by fans who only pay attention to first-round names. Every single draft class, there are receivers who test explosively in shorts and a t-shirt, but never quite translate that number onto the actual football field. And there are receivers who test underwhelmingly in shorts and a t-shirt, but who dominate once you strap the pads on and put a corner across from them in real football. Scouting departments live and die by figuring out which category a guy actually falls into, and everything about Colby Young's tape suggests he belongs firmly in that second bucket. A football player first, a workout warrior a distant second. That is exactly the kind of prospect a smart, patient front office is willing to gamble a fourth-round pick on, especially when they already have a proven infrastructure in place to develop exactly this kind of talent. So let's actually get into the tape, because this is where the real story lives. The first thing that jumps out watching Colby Young at Georgia is how he wins his targets once the football is actually in the air. This is a receiver who does not need to blow past a corner with a sudden, explosive burst to win a rep. He wins with length, with body control, and with what I would call a controlled physicality at the top of his route stem. Picture a receiver getting to that spot down the field and essentially boxing out a defensive back the exact same way a power forward boxes out underneath the rim for a rebound, creating just enough separation through hand fighting and body positioning rather than pure straight line speed. That is the calling card here. He is not going to run away from very many NFL corners in a foot race down the sideline, but he does not need to, because he wins with leverage and size in contested situations, which happens to be exactly the type of quarterback-receiver connection this Bengals passing game has built its entire offensive identity around for years now under this coaching staff. And here is the part of his game that I think gets criminally underrated by anybody just glancing at a college box score without actually watching the film. His ability to manufacture extra yardage after the catch simply by refusing to go down easily on first contact. This is not a receiver who is going to make 3 defenders miss in the open field with a series of sharp jukes and spin moves. This is a receiver who catches the football, absorbs the first hit standing straight up, drags a second defender for a handful of extra yards, and forces a third guy to finally be the one who actually brings him down to the turf. Watch enough of his college tape, and you will spot a clear, repeatable pattern. Tackles that should have ended a play at one exact spot on the field actually ending 5, 8, sometimes 10 additional yards further down the field, simply because he refuses to fall over on that first hit. That is not a flashy skill. It does not trend on social media highlight compilations the way a spin move or a hurdle does. But if you have watched T. Higgins do exactly this for the Bengals over the last several seasons, turning a routine 5-yard checkdown into a first down conversion by dragging a linebacker for extra yardage, you already understand how valuable that specific, unglamorous skill becomes over the course of a full 17-game season, especially once you get down into the red zone, where every single yard on the field matters exponentially more than it does out in the open grass at midfield. Now let's talk about where the real concerns actually live in his game, because I am not going to sit here and pretend to you that this is a finished product, because he clearly is not one yet. The biggest technical issue in his game right now, and I genuinely think this is fixable with the right coaching over time, is how he releases off the line of scrimmage against physical, press-heavy corners. Big receivers as a group have a well-documented tendency to expose their chest early in a route, giving a defensive back a big inviting surface area to punch into and redirect off the line before the route even gets started. Watch him against some of the more physical corners he faced in college, and you will see exactly that pattern show up on tape. He gets jammed hard at the line, gets rerouted toward the sideline into what coaches call the no-tread zone, that tight strip of real estate right near the boundary where a quarterback has almost zero margin for error on a downfield throw, and the route essentially dies right there before it ever has a real chance to develop into anything. That is a coachable technique issue, not an effort problem, and it is exactly the kind of specific flaw that a genuinely good receivers coach can clean up over the course of an off-season program, a training camp, and a full rookie season of daily reps. And that brings me to something I think is a genuinely underrated storyline buried in all of this. The Bengals happen to already have one of the more respected receivers coaches in the entire league on staff, a guy with a real, established track record of taking talented but technically raw route runners and sharpening their releases and their overall route running into something far more polished at the professional level. If you go back and actually watch Ja'Marr Chase's college tape at LSU, you will find a remarkably similar issue on film. A physically dominant receiver who won the majority of his reps largely by bullying smaller, less physical college corners rather than through refined release technique, and by the time he got to Cincinnati, that release package had been noticeably cleaned up within a year or two. T. Higgins had similar rough edges coming out of college too, if you go back and watch that tape honestly. So there is a real, already established blueprint on this exact roster for developing precisely this kind of big physical prospect, and that is a meaningful piece of context that a lot of national analysts breaking down this specific pick probably do not know about or simply do not bother to mention when they are just skimming a draft grade off a spreadsheet. Let's talk blocking for a minute, because I genuinely believe this might be the single most important factor in whether Colby Young actually sees meaningful snaps early in his rookie season, and it is a part of his game that does not show up anywhere in a college highlight reel. Cincinnati, like most modern NFL offenses around the league right now, loves rolling out 3 receiver personnel groupings, but they currently do not have a true blocking specialist at that third receiver spot who can effectively function almost like a de facto extra tight end whenever the offense wants to disguise a run look out of what looks like a passing personnel grouping to a defense. Watch Young's college tape on screenplays and on straightforward run-blocking reps, and you will see a guy who is not going to bulldoze a linebacker 10 yards backward off the ball, but who understands angles well, who sustains his blocks through the whistle, who keeps his hips square to take away an obvious escape lane for the defender, and who plays with legitimate, visible efforts snap after snap after snap, including at least one clip where he genuinely gets his helmet knocked clean off his own head while still actively driving his feet through the whistle to finish the block. That kind of tape does not go viral on social media. It does not get clipped and shared 1,000 times. But it absolutely, positively gets a rookie onto an NFL field far faster than flashy stats do, because position coaches and coordinators notice exactly that kind of unselfish effort long before casual fans watching on Sundays ever do. Let's also talk about special teams for a second, because I think this is genuinely the fastest, most realistic on-ramp to actual playing time for a rookie in his exact draft slot. Reports out of Georgia consistently mention real special teams experience for Young, and that background translates directly and immediately to an NFL role as what teams around the league call a gunner. The player flying down the field at full speed on punt coverage doing genuinely dangerous, high-collision, completely unglamorous work that never once shows up in a fantasy football box score but matters enormously to a head coach building out his 53-man roster and his weekly game day active list. Fourth-round picks at receiver very rarely get cut outright in modern football, so the far more relevant question is not whether he makes the roster, but how quickly he can carve out a specific valuable role that justifies real snaps on Sundays, and special teams is almost always where that story begins for a rookie receiver in his exact draft range. Here's my honest, big-picture opinion on how this entire rookie season plays out for him, and I want to be clear that this is genuinely my own personal read on the situation based on everything we just walked through, not some locked-in guarantee I am handing you as fact. I think Colby Young makes this roster outright as a fourth-round investment, because teams around this league do not typically cut mid-round draft picks that quickly without giving them a real, extended look through an entire training camp and preseason slate. I think he becomes an active game day player almost immediately through special teams work, exactly like we just talked about. From there, I genuinely believe his path to real, meaningful offensive snaps runs directly through his blocking ability and his capacity to clean up that release technique against press coverage over the course of the season. If he can show this coaching staff that he provides more juice as a blocker than the other depth options currently sitting in that receiver room, and if he can tighten up how he comes off the line against more physical, press-heavy corners in practice, I think you are looking at a rookie season with somewhere in that 30 to 40 catch range in terms of raw production, but with a disproportionate number of those catches coming in exactly the moments that matter most on a football field, third and medium conversions to keep a drive alive. Red zone possessions where size and contested catch ability become everything. The kind of high-leverage situational football where his very specific blend of physical tools becomes the actual answer to a defense that has otherwise sold out every ounce of its attention to stopping Chase and Higgins first. I also think there is a real, if admittedly smaller, path where he ends up seeing significantly more snaps than people currently expect, specifically because of how banged up NFL receiver rooms tend to get across the grind of a full 17-game regular season. Cincinnati knows this reality better than almost any other franchise in football after everything this roster has gone through with injuries at other key positions over recent years. If either Chase or Higgins misses any real time, even a short 2 or 3 week stretch, the door swings wide open in a hurry for a big-bodied rookie who already has real, tangible chemistry building with the quarterback room through a full training camp's worth of reps, and suddenly a quiet, unassuming depth piece can transform into a legitimate every-week contributor purely out of roster necessity whether the coaching staff originally planned on that timeline or not. Let's also zoom out for a second and put this pick in some historical context, because I think it actually helps explain why the Bengals keep going back to this exact well at wide receiver year after year. Go back through this franchise's draft history, and you will find a real pattern of prioritizing size and physicality at the position over pure timed speed, dating back well before Chase and Higgins ever arrived in Cincinnati. This is a front office that has consistently bet on the idea that a bigger frame gives a receiver a higher ceiling once NFL coaching gets its hands on him, even if that means living with some rougher technical edges in year one. That philosophy has paid off about as well as it possibly could with Chase and Higgins, two players who came into the league with very different strengths but shared that same baseline trait of simply being bigger and stronger than the people trying to cover them. Colby Young fits that exact mold, and understanding that organizational pattern makes this pick feel a lot less random than it might have looked to a national analyst skimming through a full 7-round draft grade in a single afternoon. I also think it is worth talking about how a rookie receiver in this exact situation typically builds trust with a franchise quarterback, because that relationship does not happen overnight, and it definitely does not happen through highlight catches in padded practice alone. Quarterbacks at the NFL level are creatures of pattern recognition above almost everything else. They want to know, before the ball ever leaves their hand, exactly where a receiver is going to be, exactly how he is going to adjust to a specific coverage look, and exactly how he is going to react if something goes wrong with the timing of a play. That trust gets built through hundreds and hundreds of unglamorous practice reps, through walkthroughs, through extra work after practice has technically ended, long before it ever shows up in an actual regular season game. For a rookie, with Young's specific skill set, that process probably runs first through Joe Flacco, who has plenty of experience getting younger players up to speed quickly before it ever fully extends to Joe Burrow. But if the early camp reports out of Cincinnati start mentioning extra reps between Burrow and Young after practice has technically wrapped for the day, that is exactly the kind of detail that tells you this relationship is developing ahead of a normal rookie schedule. Let's talk for a second about how a storyline like this one typically gets received across the actual fan base, because I think that reaction says a lot about how modern football fandom consumes information. A pick like this one almost never trends on social media the week it happens. There is no viral highlight tied to his name yet, no trade rumor, no contract dispute, nothing with the built-in drama that gets a name circulating across timelines within minutes. Most Bengals fans, if you stop them on the street today and asked who Colby Young is, would probably shrug and admit they have no real idea, and that is completely understandable, because national coverage of fourth-round rookie receivers is basically non-existent until training camp reporters start actually watching practice reps in person. But that is exactly why breaking down the tape early matters so much if you are trying to stay ahead of a story instead of reacting to it after the fact. By the time this guy makes his first meaningful contested catch on a Sunday afternoon and casual fans start typing his name into a search bar, wondering who he is, the people who watch this film breakdown today are already going to understand exactly why it happened and exactly what to expect from him going forward. So heading into training camp, here is exactly what I personally would be watching for if I had a seat in those stands or access to those practice reps. Watch his release off the line of scrimmage specifically during 1-on-1 and 7-on-7 periods, especially against the more physical, press-oriented corners on this roster, because that specific matchup is going to tell you everything you need to know about how much real technical progress he has made since arriving in Cincinnati. Watch whether the coaching staff ever actually lines him up in the slot during camp, because based purely on the tape we just walked through, I personally believe he profiles far more as an outside receiver who needs to build up his speed over a longer route stem rather than a quick, twitchy slot option who wins with sudden change of direction. But coaching staff sometimes see something in a player during live practice reps that never quite showed up on college tape, and if they start moving him around inside the formation more than expected, that tells you they see more positional versatility in him than his college usage alone would ever suggest. And pay close attention to exactly who is throwing him the football during those camp reps. If it is mostly Joe Flacco getting him early rhythm and timing work, while Joe Burrow spends the bulk of his own reps locked in tight with Chase and Higgins, that is a completely normal, expected, healthy rookie progression for a player in his draft slot. But if you start seeing Burrow specifically target him during live, padded practice periods as camp rolls along week by week, that is a real, meaningful signal that the coaching staff is building genuine trust in him faster than a typical rookie timeline would suggest, and that is exactly the kind of small, easy-to-miss detail that can tip you off to a much bigger role coming his way before it ever actually shows up in an official box score on a Sunday. One more angle I want to cover before we wrap this up, because I think it genuinely matters for how you should set your expectations heading into the season. Rookie receivers across the entire league, even talented ones, almost always take a real step forward specifically in year 2 rather than year 1. Once the speed of the professional game stops feeling overwhelming and starts feeling more manageable. That pattern holds up across decades of NFL history, and there is no obvious reason to think Young breaks that mold just because he landed in a strong organization with good coaching. So if his rookie season ends up looking modest on paper, a handful of catches, a handful of special teams tackles, some quiet reps as a blocker in specific packages, I do not think that should be read as a disappointment or a bust label. I think it should be read as exactly the kind of foundation-building season that sets up a much bigger role in year 2, once he has a full off-season program, a full training camp, and an entire regular season of experience under his belt to build from. Patience is going to matter a lot with a prospect like this one, and I think that is worth saying clearly now, in July, before a slow start to his rookie year gets unfairly overblown by anybody expecting instant production out of a 4th-round pick. Here's the bottom line on Colby Young, and I really want you to sit with this for a second before you scroll away from this video. This is not a headline-grabbing name right now. Nobody is doing a hot take segment debating whether he gets traded somewhere else next offseason. Nobody is speculating about his next contract extension or his market value. But sometimes the most genuinely important stories inside a franchise's entire season are not the loud ones that dominate national football media coverage. They are the quiet depth pieces who end up making a small handful of unforgettable, momentum-shifting plays at exactly the moment a team needs them most, whether that is Week 3 or a January playoff game nobody saw coming. If this Bengals offense is truly going to push for a genuine Super Bowl run the way this front office has clearly built this entire roster to do over the last several months, it is not just going to come down to Burrow, Chase, and Higgins putting up highlight numbers every single week. It is going to come down to whether role players like Colby Young can handle the unglamorous, dirty work well enough to actually earn real snaps on Sundays, and whether he can turn even a modest handful of those snaps into exactly the kind of hidden yardage, contested catch plays that quietly swing an entire football game in Cincinnati's favor without ever making a single national highlight show. Now I want to hear directly from you, Street Hoops Nation, because this channel only really works when you are an active part of the conversation instead of just watching passively and moving on to the next video. Drop it in the comments right now, based on everything we just broke down together today. Do you think Colby Young ends up being more of a special teams and blocking specialist for most of this rookie season? Or do you think he legitimately pushes his way into real consistent offensive snaps by the middle of the year? And for anybody out there who actually watched him play at Georgia in person or on a regular basis, does this profile we just walked through genuinely match what you saw from him at the college level, or do you think there is even more to his overall game that the specific tape we covered today did not fully capture? Let me know all of that down below, because I genuinely want to hear what real, informed Bengals fans think about this one, not just the casual takes. If this breakdown helped you get familiar with a name you probably were not paying much attention to before today, smash that like button right now before you scroll away. Drop your honest take in the comments section, and if you are not subscribed to Dre Talk Sports yet, go ahead and get on that right now and turn on those notifications, because as training camp rolls on day by day, you already know I am going to be tracking every single rep this rookie gets on that practice field and bringing you the breakdown the very second there is real, substantive news to report on him. Until next time, This is Dre. Stay locked in, and I will see you in the next one.